Before we finish up, we've spoken a couple times in reference to what's happening in Gaza right now.
Yes.
And I saw a previous interview you did, I think it was with a French publication, where you were talking about the nature of October 7th and sort of the inclination to call it a terrorist attack and the kind of to denude it of the context of Israeli occupation. And I'd like to start by asking you to talk about that a little bit, because I don't really want to sort of like question the things you said there without hearing you say them now, if that makes sense.
Yes, well, I think there were some clips of that discussion that circulated by Ben Shapiro and his friends on the right.
And Rufo as well, yeah.
Yeah, and Rufo. Nice to know he's part of it. But look, I have always and consistently opposed the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th, and that part of my position has never changed. I do think that within Palestine there are those who are in favor of armed struggle and others who are trying to seek diplomatic means to achieve greater self-determination or even liberation for Palestine. So I think it's worthwhile understanding why people do sometimes go for armed struggle. I think war brings with it sexual violence, and we've seen it on both sides, and it's deplorable. One reason I am against war and why I am actually a proponent of nonviolence and have been for many, many years, as far back as I remember, is that I long for and call for a mode of cohabitation in Palestine, in Israel-Palestine, that would actually give radical equality, freedom, and self-determination to the Palestinian people, as well as all the other inhabitants of the land. I've thought a lot about the one-state solution. I've done a lot of work recently thinking about binationalism. What would a federated authority look like? What's the history of calling for a federated binational vision? I've been reading material from the 30s and 40s when people were hoping that whatever state emerged in 1948 would be binational and would guarantee equality for all people. I want a political solution. I actually want a constitutional solution. I am not an advocate of violence, and I don't believe that understanding historically how Hamas formed after the bitter disappointment of the Oslo Accords, and understanding how its aims were established and how its aims were revised in 2017, that I think it would be useful to understand how they formed so that we might be more effective in convincing them to lay down their arms. That is my view. And unfortunately, though, you could just call them terrorists and be done with it. You could just call them evil and be done with it. But then we're learning nothing. And we're not learning how we might find an end to violence, which is my ultimate goal.
I do shy away from using the phrase terrorism, right? Because I think it nearly always is a pejorative. It's nearly always used to describe your opponents. And whilst with the we might use the lexicon of, to describe the bombardment of Gaza as a war crime, why is it that, what Hamas did on October 7th, why don't we say that that's a war crime? Why do we say that that's terrorism? And I often think the distinction is essentially kind of reveals your own biases.
Yes.
I understand that point.
Yes.
The thing I struggle to understand that I heard you say in that previous interview, I think you used the phrase, you said that it wasn't an anti-Semitic attack. And I didn't really understand what you meant by that. Could you talk about that?
Yes, well, I think we've all seen, or many of us have seen footage where Hamas militants are jubilant about having killed Jews.
Yeah.
So that is clearly anti-Semitic, and there's no question about that. Do we think that Hamas is committing violence against Israeli citizens because primarily they are anti-Semitic, or do we think that these violent acts are part of a larger struggle to emerge from colonial domination? I think we have to open that question. I'm not saying that anti-Semitism isn't part of it. For many Palestinians, the only Jews they've ever met have been soldiers. I remember going to Ramallah and meeting people who said, oh, the only Jew I've ever met is a soldier. You're the first one. And I was like, wow, really? What does that do to your idea of what a Jew is? So, yeah. But I think if we say it's only or exclusively anti-Semitic, that they just hate the Jews, we're not understanding that they also hate living under colonial subjugation. Gaza has been under siege for decades. When it wasn't literally occupied, as it is now, it was still under siege, and it did not have autonomy as a state or as a political entity. Doesn't have rights of movement. It doesn't have control over its own electricity and water, or even the amount of food or building materials that can come in through the border. It is surrounded by soldiers and has been. So that people want to be liberated from that life is no surprise. And I think if we say, oh, they just hate the Jews, we imagine that they would be happier being colonized by another group of people. So how do we think about the anti-colonial struggle and the way it is intermixed with anti-Semitism in this instance? I think it's complex, it's sensitive, but it certainly deserves some careful thinking.